Japanese planes appear in the sky, advancing towards the American aircraft carrier, creating a tense atmosphere.
In the American fleet, we prepared.
With the enemy fleet approaching, the men of the carrier prepared for the inevitable clash. Every weapon checked, every plane ready.
The journey begins now, as these pilots take to the skies, heading straight into the heart of the storm.
The enemy approaches!
A fierce counterattack by U.S. Navy pilots inflicted heavy losses on the Japanese forces. The fighting was brutal, but control of the skies.
The carrier prepared for the inevitable. Every weapon system meticulously checked. Every man ready for the coming fight.
This fierce chase across the skies of the Pacific theater highlighted the sheer determination of the naval aviators.
Power from the sea!
The devastating impact of naval artillery brought chaos and destruction to the American fleet.
Hit hard, the Japanese bomber plunged towards the ocean. It was a scene repeated countless times during the intense aerial campaign.
The race continued. Despite heavy resistance, the American forces were determined to attack.
Carrier. The ensuing explosions crippled the vessel, but the battle was far from
Battles. The carrier takes a direct hit, igniting massive fires below deck. Despite the chaos, the remaining squadrons scrambled to launch a desperate.
The fierce assault crippled the fleet. Wave after wave, Japanese aircraft, American warships.
Was fierce and unforgiving for both sides.
The enemy!
The naval anti-aircraft batteries provided a fierce defense. Despite heavy losses, the fleet's resolve remained unbroken against the enemy assault.
The war in the Pacific was brutal, fought on waves and in the sky. As the task force advanced, the men...
As the dive bombers pressed their attack, the American fleet sustained heavy damage. On the decks, the fight to save the ships became increasingly desperate.
Attack from above!
Above the carrier groups, the air war raged on. U.S. Navy presently sued Thailand.
The final assault began with a relentless wave of Japanese dive bombers. The American fleet suffered catastrophic losses. The carrier takes a direct hit. As the sailors fight the raging fires below, the Japanese planes press the attack, crippling the massive ship. It became a battleground where the stakes were nothing less than the future of the war. The relentless Japanese assault proved too much for the beleaguered vessel. In the cruel seas of the Pacific, this was the decisive attack. The Japanese air crews pressed their advantage, determined to sink the crippled carrier.
The fleet advances into the combat zone. With the Japanese task force sighted, the pilots scramble, launching into the decisive battle.
This was the decisive attack. The carrier, once the pride of the fleet, was now crippled and burning.
The planes returned safely, mission accomplished. The carrier immediately prepared for the next engagement, pressing forward through the rough seas. The fierce attack crippled the Japanese flagship. Despite the desperate efforts of the crew, the explosions proved too much, and the great carrier began to sink.
The carrier takes a direct hit, the explosions tearing through the flight deck.
Above the Coral Sea, the battle raged. American pilots engaged the enemy in a desperate struggle, resulting in significant losses. The battle for air superiority was brutal, with both sides suffering heavy losses in the skies of the carrier fleet.
As the alarm sounded across the Pacific, the soldiers of the U.S. Navy stood resolute. They were ready for anything the enemy could throw at them.
As dawn breaks over the Pacific, the pilots of the U.S. Navy prepare to face the enemy. Their mission: secure the skies above the fleet.
The final attack pushed the fleet to its limits. Get those fires out! Move, move, move! We need water on the hangar deck now!
Diving low, the Hellcats unleashed a fierce counterattack. The resulting explosions crippled the Japanese carrier, turning the tide of the battle.
Having located the American fleet, the Japanese pilots prepared for their attack run. There was no turning back. The carrier came under immediate and heavy attack from Japanese torpedo bombers. The explosions ripped through the hull, sealing the fate of the vessel. Despite heavy resistance, the dive bombers scored critical hits. The resulting fires proved impossible to contain, sealing the carrier's fate.
Japanese Zero was hit, sending it plummeting towards the sea.
The American pilots pressed their attack with unprecedented ferocity, scoring direct hits on the Japanese carrier. Despite the massive damage, the sailors desperately battled the flames, determined to save the carrier from the onslaught.
Hit by multiple bombs and torpedoes, the aircraft carrier was doomed. It began to slip beneath the waves, taking hundreds of men with it.
Mission accomplished! As dawn breaks over the Pacific, the carrier groups finalize preparations. The order is clear. Prepare to attack the enemy fleet.
The bombers scored direct hits, resulting in massive explosions that crippled the enemy vessel.
The decisive attack proved overwhelming. In minutes, the great carrier began to slip beneath the waves.
The squadron returned. Mission accomplished. Though weary, the crew knew the fight against the Japanese carrier force would continue.
As the Japanese fighter crashed in a fiery spray, the American squadrons continued their relentless pursuit. As the heavy cruiser cut through the turbulent waves, the Imperial Japanese Navy soldiers braced for the inevitable confrontation. The coordinated strike hammered the American defenses, but even under heavy fire, the carrier refused to yield, launching a desperate counterattack.
This was the final defense. The men fought fiercely against the relentless attacks from the air.
In the brutal calculus of naval warfare, the cost of air superiority was measured in steel and blood.
The massive warship surges forward, manned by sailors determined to face the enemy. This is the final resolve. Crippled and ablaze, the massive Japanese warship finally slid beneath the waves, a decisive victory for the Allied forces in the Pacific theater. Hit hard, the Japanese bomber spun out of control. It was just one of many lost that day as the American forces asserted air superiority. The USS Lexington takes a direct hit. Damage control teams fight desperately below deck, but with the ship listing heavily, this was the final defense. The planes returned, battered but victorious. For these men, the mission was accomplished, but the war was far from over.
The Japanese Zeros scored direct hits on the carrier. The ensuing inferno threatened to engulf the vessel.
We need water! Get those fires out!
Under relentless assault, the men of the carrier fought back with everything they had. The explosions were devastating, but the defense held firm.
Under relentless assault, the Japanese carrier begins to list. Despite the desperate efforts of the crew, the damage is catastrophic, and the great ship is lost.
Crippled by the relentless bombing, the massive carrier begins its final plunge. The ensuing chaos saw the remaining crew desperately attempting to abandon ship.
A hard-fought battle ends in final victory. The fleet moves onward.
The American fleet engaged the Japanese squadron in a pitched battle. This decisive confrontation would determine the fate of the Pacific theater.
Fierce attack!
The skies above the Pacific Ocean became a theater of brutal conflict. These pilots faced overwhelming odds daily.
This was the decisive defense, a desperate struggle for survival amidst the chaos of the Pacific War.
Fire at will!
With the fleet assembled and the planes armed, they steam towards the final battle.
The final confrontation. American and Japanese warships engaged in a decisive battle. The American fleet sustained heavy damage, yet refused to yield.
The mission is accomplished. The carrier pushes onward, ready for the next engagement.
Remaining, the battle for air superiority was far from over.